All right, let's dive into a problem that, let's be honest, probably hits close to home for a lot of you working with Azure. We're talking about building a clean, secure CI/CD pipeline when your whole world is split across different subscriptions. How do you turn that potential mess into a masterpiece? Let's get into it. So, you've totally done the right thing. You've got your environments isolated for security, right? Dev is in its own subscription, test is somewhere else, and prod is on total lockdown. But now what? This smart security move accidentally creates a whole new headache. How in the world do you build one single unified deployment process that can navigate all these separate worlds without just creating absolute chaos?
Before we even get to the answers, let's really map out the problem. Because for a lot of teams, this feels like you're trying to get through a maze completely blindfolded. So let's take the blindfold off and see what it actually looks like.
Okay, so it all starts simply enough, right? Your developers are in their zone, they're iterating fast, pushing code, doing their thing all inside the dev subscription. You can think of it as their sandbox. Then that code gets promoted. It moves over to a dedicated test or QA subscription where it gets put through its paces. This place is way more controlled. It's like its own separate island, completely apart from that dev sandbox. And then you have the final destination, the production subscription. This is the fortress. It's the most secure, the most critical, and the most isolated environment of them all. And this is where the nightmare begins. If you don't have a clear plan, a real architectural pattern, your deployment logic just gets scattered to the wind. You end up with duplicate pipelines, insecure credentials stashed in all sorts of places, and just no single source of truth. It's messy, it's a pain to audit, and frankly, it's a huge security risk. But look, it does not have to be this way at all. The fix is to actually stop and choose a deliberate architectural pattern. There are structured, proven ways to build bridges between these subscription islands. So let's explore the two main ways you can do this. So you're basically at a fork in the road here. On one side, you can build a central control tower, a single pipeline hub that manages literally everything. Or you can go with a federated model, where each environment has its own local control, but they all have to follow a shared rulebook. Let's dig into the first option, and I'll be honest, this is my personal favorite for any serious enterprise environment. We're talking about the central hub model. The idea here is you create a dedicated pipeline subscription. Now, this subscription doesn't host your apps or anything like that. Its only job is to host the Azure pipelines that deploy your apps to the other subscriptions. It becomes the single, authoritative, one-stop shop for every single deployment. Now, the secret sauce that makes this pattern so secure is something called a managed identity. Instead of messing with passwords or secret keys, your central pipeline gets its own official identity in Azure Active Directory. You then grant that identity permission to deploy to your other subscriptions, and here's the magic part. Azure manages the credentials for this identity for you, rotating them behind the scenes automatically. This just wipes out an entire category of security risks. It means no secrets in your code, period. So the flow becomes super simple and incredibly secure. A developer commits their code, that triggers the one and only pipeline in your central hub. The pipeline then authenticates to Azure using its managed identity, and based on the permissions you've given it, it deploys the code to the right environment. It's clean, it's secure, and it's so easy to trace. Okay, so what's the alternative? The federated model. This one takes a totally different approach, and it's really all about giving teams more autonomy instead of centralizing everything. In this model, each subscription, dev, test, and prod, gets its own Azure pipeline. Now, to keep things from going completely off the rails, they all have to reference a central library of shared pipeline templates. This makes sure that everyone is following the same approved deployment steps, even if they're kicking them off locally. The identity you're using here is usually a service principal. You can just think of it like a service account, a robot user for your pipeline. You create one for each pipeline, give it permissions inside its own subscription, and here's the key difference. You are now on the hook for managing its credentials. And those credentials are often long-lived and need to be rotated manually. So the flow here is a lot more spread out. A code commit triggers the pipeline in, say, the dev subscription. That pipeline uses the shared templates for its logic, it authenticates with its own service principal, and then it deploys locally. This definitely gives teams more autonomy, but it comes at the cost of having to manage way more identities and pipelines. So we've looked at two perfectly good patterns. But when you're talking about enterprise-level architecture, you need a clear blueprint, one that puts security and manageability at scale right at the top of the list. And here it is. This is our recommendation. For most large-scale security-first organizations, the central hub pattern is just the best foundation you can build on. Why? Well, it dramatically shrinks your attack surface. Instead of having powerful deployment credentials scattered across multiple environments, you have one single, tightly controlled, and easily audited point of deployment. Think about it. If a dev environment gets compromised, the attacker finds nothing. There are no pipeline credentials there for them to exploit.
Now look, this isn't a silver bullet. Nothing is. The pros are obvious, right? You get centralized control, dead simple auditing, and way better security. The cons, though, are things you just have to manage. Yeah, it could become a bottleneck if you don't manage it well, and it absolutely requires careful role-based access control, or RBAC. If you get those RBAC rules wrong, you've just created a new problem. But the security payoff you get from centralization is just undeniable.
And speaking of security, just picking a pattern is not enough. Your pipeline is an incredibly privileged system. It basically has the keys to your entire kingdom. You have to build strong security guardrails around it. It is not optional.
First things first, RBAC is your golden rule. This means you live and breathe the principle of least privilege. Your pipeline's managed identity should only have the exact permissions it needs to do its job, and not one single permission more. So, for example, don't just grant it contributor on the entire subscription. No way. Instead, grant it specific rights to deploy to a specific web app or a single resource group. Be surgical.
Second, we need to talk about secrets. And let me be perfectly 100% clear on this. Never, ever store passwords, connection strings, or API keys in your code or in your pipeline variables. That is just asking for a breach. Always use Azure Key Vault. You can link your Key Vault directly to your pipeline so it can fetch the secrets securely at runtime right when it needs them, and then they're gone. And finally, you have to audit everything. I mean, everything. Turn on all the logging for Azure Pipelines and Azure AD. Monitor who's signing in, what deployments are happening, and when they're happening. And, this is crucial, set up alerts for anything that looks weird, like a deployment kicking off in the middle of the night. You have to trust, but you also have to verify. So, as we wrap this up, I want you to ask yourself a serious question. After seeing these patterns and these principles, what does your deployment process actually look like today? Have you really designed a secure superhighway to get your code safely to production? Or are you just kind of driving down a dirt road with no guardrails, just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best? The choice and the architecture is all yours. Thanks for watching.